So we've talked about what societies look like when there's order, when the organizations of society are working and when they're not. And you're going to watch a video here about someone that talks to you and explains what it's like without rule of law. Rule of law is the phrase. It's a common phrase that rule of law exists in this country. Rule of law is in decline in many other countries. Actually, pretty soon we're going to look at, there's a website. It is called the World Justice Project. And it actually has evaluated all of the different countries in the world. And some examples are that since 2016, most countries in the world, the rule of law is in decline. Since 2016. That means that the functions of law, the justice systems, governance, rulemaking, lack of corruption, that kind of stuff, since 2016, most countries have declined in their level of rule of law. On their human rights, how would I say this? On supporting human rights, on checks on government power, civil and criminal justice. There's been an increase of discrimination in many countries throughout the world. The right to life and security is in decline in many countries. Even due process, that people get like a court appearance at a certain time, or freedom of expression and religion, all of these things are part of rule of law. 34% of the countries that they measure were in decline. So a third of the world's countries, their rule of law is in decline. Their legal order of society is in decline. 29% of them that were measured had improved. So almost a third of them were on the way up, and almost 30% of them stayed the same. The biggest single drop of country was the Philippines. The top 3 performers were Denmark, Norway, and Finland. So those if you guys know where they are, there's more northerly territories up above Europe. Denmark, it's up in that Arctic Circle. So you've got Norway, Sweden, and Finland, and Denmark here. And they're right up along our northern areas. So if you're in northern Sweden, those are those people that are using dog sleds and things like that, right? The bottom 3 performers back in 2018 was Afghanistan, Cambodia, and Venezuela. This year, again, I think the top 3 performers were the same. Denmark, Finland, and Sweden are still at the highest level of rule of law. You might wonder why. And the lowest scores, again, it was Venezuela was on the list. Venezuela is still on the list as the lowest score for rule of law. Lawlessness. Yep, there's a lot going on in Venezuela. Cambodia is still on the list. And instead of Afghanistan, now it's the Democratic Republic of Congo, as opposed to Afghanistan, but I think that's about to change. Anyway, we're going to watch this video here about without rule of law. And you've got space on page 5 that you can write some stuff down here. What does society look like when rule of law exists, according to the narrator? What does society look like without rule of law? WROL. What are examples of things that could and have destroyed rule of law? Because he mentioned several. And then you'll give a personal response. Okay, well, what does he say? What does society look like when rule of law exists? Society is in operation, yeah.
Do you need to change this?
I do.
Oh.
Yeah.
I know.
No, I didn't know.
At least you told you.
Oh, yeah. The clock was on until somebody did. Society is in operation. What else? When rule of law exists. Yeah, Raina?
It's
Safe.
like gas and everything is there, so I guess all of our resources.
Gasoline, food, etc. available.
And no natural disasters.
Um,
Well, he said something about that.
well, I would put down here examples of things that could destroy rule of law would be the natural disaster.
Natural economic crisis and economic.
Last call for pictures. If you haven't come down, come on now.
He talked about the devaluing of the dollar or high inflation. Right? And this would cause people to revolt, right? If they became so dissatisfied with a condition in their country. What else does society look like with rule of law?
There's law enforcement.
Law enforcement is available to you. Law enforcement and first responders.
There's like people outside enjoying nice day.
Yeah, it's safe, so you can enjoy like social activities, social or outdoor activities. Okay, what else? Safety comm, food's available, police available, people have, there are conveniences available. Even something like the mall or a movie theater, sports, that kind of stuff. And one thing that you can write with this, just so you're clear, that rule of law, ROL is rule of law, and his definition of it was that the engine of society is functioning. Not perfectly, but functioning. And the engine part of that is a helpful metaphor, right? It keeps running, and you have to work to keep it running, right? What did he say were some conditions of a society without rule of law?
Societal services unavailable.
Services become unavailable. So the same thing, like medical, police, he even commented on waste disposal. Like if suddenly we didn't have running water for weeks, that might complicate. Maybe not for farmers. Yeah, people start dying.
Especially people who need all that medical.
Yeah, on like medical life support kind of thing.
Yeah, I can imagine a lot of people dying.
Yep, and that's an example of what was discussed in like Puerto Rico when there was the flood or whatever it was. They lost electricity, generators weren't available, and yeah, people that were in there died. What else? Anarchy, no punishment for crimes, and he said, dark or evil element will cause harm. Murders or whatever. Necessities of life are gone, we said. People in hospitals will die. Whatever services exist, they'll be overwhelmed. Whatever exists of them, right? And compared to this other, the engine of society is functioning, and this one here, the societal engine is busted. And it was one of our questions that was discussed yesterday, what some of the hindrances to coming back into rule of law after you've lost it. And that's the main part, is it's very difficult to get that engine started again once you've lost that running engine there. He talked about, things that could destroy rule of law could be, that there's civil unrest over government power, that kind of stuff. In some countries more than others. So, for example, right now, this is what's happening with the Taliban in Kabul, right? Where they've taken over.
Is Kabul the
In
capital?
Afghanistan,
Is
yeah.
the capital?
I think it is, yeah. Natural disasters, that kind of stuff. Loss of supply, I guess we could say, for fuel, food, electricity. And we have economic collapse there. So take a second and respond to question 4 yourself. What is your personal response to watching that video? Does he sound like his views could kind of fit with a Canadian? He clearly was talking from an American perspective, and there are different, the mindset of an American can be very different than the mindset of a Canadian. Yeah. A, what is your response to watching the video? And B, what did you think about his perspective? Did it kind of fit with your Canadian experience? Again, it's interesting because you have some experience with this, right?
Well,
Our engine didn't completely shut down, but it was put into neutral, I guess, something, if that's the analogy. Toilet paper. My husband kept bringing home bottles and bottles of sanitizer that his workplace gave him. We have a whole box that we'll never use, right?
That must have gotten annoying for him.
What's that?
That must have gotten annoying for him, all the dumping sanitizer on him.
I'm not sure. Yeah. People working from home, we were washing our groceries, right? So, yeah, you have some experience with this
well, even just like the riots that happened
in the States.
like the states of
Yeah.
the election.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah, and that's there is that growing divide, and I don't think it's a new thing. I think it comes and goes, it ebbs and flows, the divide between people's ideologies, right? Okay, we're not going to share the responses that you came up with there, but we're just going to quickly, I'm not going to write out the answers or anything. We're going to quickly just discuss the questions that you were preparing to discuss yesterday, so that we can kind of finish up this section here. And tomorrow, if anybody isn't going to be here, tomorrow we're going to start kind of it's going to be, the investigating is going to kind of, I'm going to pass it on to you. I'm going to give you a website, I'm going to give you some ideas to consider, and you're all going to kind of delve into an area of rule of law and see what you find.
In a group or individual?
I think individually is great, but if people need it to be in a group, it's possible. So we talked about, the things preventing from societies from regaining that natural order once they've lost it. It's just very difficult to start over, like to get it started, even that initial beginning, like Haiti, if you lose the grid, how do you begin again with this? There, you can't get through, roads are blocked, there's the danger of electricity and, power lines and stuff like that. Like, where do you even start, right? So it is just very difficult to get it started again. We finished yesterday talking about why it was important to have written rules, not just rules that we all accept that we follow, but like a written, documented copy of those rules. Documented rules can be followed more than verbal laws, and if it's documented, that means that it's accessible to all and that there's a clear understanding by all people involved. So like our Criminal Code of Canada is documented, all set up there. Does it seem like order exists if some members of society have rights when other members don't? So Aisley, you had that question. Do you want to share what you came up with?
Is there the people who do have the rights? People who do have the rights will still be bothered by it because like it could start to
Okay.
Is that the question?
Does it seem like so order we kind of mean is rule of law happening, now that you know what this phrase means, is social order happening if only some people have rights when other people don't in the society? And it probably wouldn't last too long because like he said, some people will start revolting, taking what they don't naturally have access to, right? So in order for order to exist, there has to be a sense of equality, For example, just again, thinking of the Taliban, the Taliban specifically restrict women. So anybody looking from the outside into that kind of thing would say, well, no, there's not really order there because there's suddenly a power gap between, who has access to things, who can leave the home, who has a right to an education, that kind of stuff, who can walk down the street when they want, right? There's no order and that's our outside view making that opinion there. Question 4, how do you think resources are used in a society without order or rules? Who gets the resources if there's no rule of law? It might be unfairly distributed. Resources, and we're talking about money, but we're also talking about, jobs, we're talking about housing, employment, like all sorts of things. For example, clean water. This court case has been up against the Canadian federal government for quite a while. Like the federal government gives money to the provinces. The province is then in control of education. Each province pays a certain amount of funds, a certain amount per student. But it was proven in court that the government actually funded less per Indigenous student. And not just a little bit less, a lot less. So there's an imbalance of resources, right? That from the very top down, there was a lot less funded for Indigenous education compared to non-Indigenous education. That's an example of resource use. And the court case was decided on, it still hasn't been corrected. What do you think is more effective? A punishment? Will punishments keep people from committing crimes? Or will maintain order? Will society have order if there are significant punishments? Or if you offered rewards for good behavior? Lexi and Brody, you guys had this. What did you discuss? You think punishment is the way to, yeah?
And then people see what happens after punishment, they won't continue to keep doing it.
Okay, yeah.
Like obviously, it could also work the same as offering rewards. They see good things
But
happen.
then so many people would need.
But then there's also
Yeah.
bad things going on. There's no punishment happening.
You can kind of wonder, like, what do you mean by rewards? Well, I mean, you have freedom if you are, abiding by the law. Whereas if you commit a crime, you lose your freedom, as an example, right? This is the difference between a left side of center political mentality versus right of center mentality is the idea of punishments. A lot of conservative governments in Canada like this idea of, stronger sentencing or creating bills that something else is more law, like it's illegal, that kind of stuff. So like the Harper government created a lot of that stuff. Minimum jail sentences, stronger penalties to the youth justice system, that kind of stuff. What's interesting though, so you kind of made the comment that you think, if you have a really strong penalty, things won't happen. But in the studies that they've done where there is the death penalty in elements of the states, it is not a deterrent. It has no effect on reducing crime. What instead reduces crime is addressing the social issues, poverty, segregation, employment, education, that kind of stuff. But of course, we do still have punishments. And again, it's not necessarily the goal in our laws and sentences, the sentencing that we have for offenders isn't the goal. It's meant to be a deterrent. It is meant to stop people from committing these crimes. That guy that went over in James Smith Cree Nation, he took guns over there, so they charged him with first-degree murder. It's very likely that he's experienced the justice system either personally or immediate members of his family. There's just a constant kind of, from some communities of poverty, there's a constant kind of involvement with the justice system because they don't see these punishments as deterrent. They just see it as part of the natural process. 4 characteristics of a society where order and rule exists, and I think we've kind of discussed that. Did you want to add anything to it, or you're good with this? No. Characteristics of a society where rule exists, this is rule of law society, and so we've answered that with that. Haiti was a country that was turned into chaos overnight by, in multiple moments from natural disasters. What parts of their ordered society would fall apart first? So Luke and Jack, you guys just... Government? Do you mean like what government can provide?
Yeah.
So government...
And then like providing, being able to rebuild.
Yeah, government providing, resources, the needs of the people. And what did you just say? Sorry? After that, it would be what?
Like to rebuild.
Rebuilding.
Not enough resources, not enough money to rebuild.
Yeah. Resources, money. It's even difficult as far as charities go because a lot of people are more and more distrustful of charities, right? Charities can be reviewed to be assessed to find out how much of every dollar you donate actually goes to, the thing that you're hoping it goes to, as opposed to the, organization, the overseers that look after that. So this is a really important concept that you all understand, this idea of rule of law. It's the functioning protection of human rights, an ordered society, a working justice system, an involved protection of rights, that kind of stuff. So the concept of rule of law is that it is better to live by an approved set of laws than to live under a ruler that would make laws at will. So there's an uncertainty to that. And there's 3 main parts to having rule of law. Individuals have to accept that the law is necessary, so they recognize the law. The law has to apply to everybody equally, so there can't be anybody that is above the law. And no one in society can have the authority to exercise unrestricted power, meaning nobody can act above the law or change the law on their own, except rights removed when it is lawful. So our example is, we've talked about this, they're called reasonable limitations in Canadian law. Does anybody remember us talking about that?
Yeah.
Reasonable limitations, it's section 1 of the Charter. You know, all these freedoms and rights are protected unless it is deemed to be a reasonable limitation in a democratic society. And an example of a reasonable restriction on a right is that your mobility rights can be taken away once you've committed an unlawful act. Right. We were just discussing at the end of class, like it's very personal maybe to some people, and I don't know any of you well enough to know how close you may have been with the family, but the court case is happening right now. I think today is day 3 of that case for the woman that went missing from our community, right?
Sherry?
Yeah. Yeah. So he's on trial. I'd have to look it up. Is it second degree? Is it first degree? I'm thinking it must be because, you know, so Brody made the comment that they found some gunshot shells.
Yeah, like 2 years, like, but however long it was.
Yeah.
Like when they first started investigating the scene, they actually found like shell casings.
Yes.
But they never let out that.
Disclosed?
Until like a couple days.
More, okay. And I find that, and blood recovered?
Blood
So-
on the loader.
What?
There's blood on the loader.
Oh, okay. So it makes sense, and I'm not sure if any of you would have picked up on that from if you watch cop shows and stuff, but there will be in investigations an element of the, you know, crime scene, for example, that they'll specifically choose to withhold, that it won't be a publicly known thing. So then they'll use that as the kind of test. So if they talk to people and somebody mentions something, but it wasn't publicly known, you know, that's a red flag for them, that kind of stuff. Or if somebody's confessing to something, but they can't explain an element of it that was never released to the public, that kind of stuff. So that could be the kind of test, right? Yeah.
It was like on like a board. And it was splattered on the loader.
Yeah, it's pretty sad. Now, I'm not gonna, I'll just say that this is optional if you want to respond to this. There's that. But we are going to look up, so we'll do this starting tomorrow. And will everybody be here tomorrow? In pajamas? It's pajama day tomorrow?
I'm not here tomorrow.
Okay, is tomorrow one of those days? That's what I wondered. This is from, and you can write this down. Like these are 2 options. This is an option and an option, but there'll be other options. You know, you can tell that these are a bit dated. There is a website called the World's Justice Project.org. And I'm not connected to the internet right now, so I'm not sure I'd be able to get to it. The World Justice Project, like I said, is an organization that assesses on a constant basis all of the countries, the governments, the justice system, what human rights are upheld in different countries. Hungary right now, Poland and Hungary are the 2 countries that have declined the most in the last 5 years. Hungary is the example of the country. They wanted to arrest a citizen that was on like a commercial airline over the summer. Did any of you hear about that? They wanted to arrest a citizen that was on a public airplane, and so they phoned in or communicated with, you know, the country that this plane was over top of to say that there was a bomb on the plane, which caused them, of course, to land the plane quickly in Hungary. So the pilots and the airliners decided to land that plane thinking it was for the safety of the passengers. But when it got down, they found out or realized that the government had made that false claim so they would down the plane so they could arrest a passenger that was on the flight who thought he was safe, having left the country he was in danger of, to get to wherever his destination was. So the country made the false claim to bring the plane down to arrest a civilian. So that's an example of lawlessness, right?
It's very gangster.
Gangster? Yes. Yeah, so we'll start with that
Doesn't
stuff.
sound like a good leader.
Good leader?
Doesn't sound like
Oh, yes, and that's why they were one of the countries where their lawfulness has been the most in decline, right?
Yeah, that like they're causing terror just for that.
Yes. Yeah.